Welcome, everyone. My name is Izzy Greenberg. Welcome to Early Care Connection. Today, we are joined by our usual resident panel of experts, Meryl Gay from the Connecticut Early Childhood Alliance and Ava Bermudez-Zimmerman from the Child Care for Connecticut's Future campaign. As always, I want to thank Sandra for providing interpretation for us this morning, and of course, to our whole community for being here and learning together. So we are going to get right into it today. We've got the first of two sessions on the kindergarten age change. So today we will do one with the Connecticut Project. We're taking next week off. We weren't sure if folks would still be traveling or just getting back into it the Monday following Thanksgiving. So we decided we'll give you guys that one off. We'll start up again the following week with the second in the Kindergarten Start Age series. So mark your calendars for that. Let me just go right into it and announce our guests. We're joined today by Courtney Parkerson, who is the director at the Community Project, and Coralys Santana, policy and advocacy strategist at the Connecticut Project. So let me just go right into welcoming you, Courtney, and I know you have a screen share to do as well, so you can just jump right in. Thanks for being here today.
Great, thanks, Izzy. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's great to be back with you all this morning discussing the change in kindergarten eligibility. I am Courtney Parkerson. I am with the Connecticut Project Action Fund, and we're here to talk to you about the Start with Equity campaign that we have launched around this change. A little bit about the Connecticut Project Action Fund. We are an organization that works on behalf of low-income individuals and families in Connecticut. We leverage resources and advocacy to try to achieve systems change on behalf of those individuals in Connecticut. The campaign that we have put together represents a broad number of stakeholders impacted by this change, and Coralys will go into more detail including all of those stakeholders that have signed on to a letter further on in the presentation. We have also pulled together a steering committee that's helping to inform the campaign and to make strategic decisions to help amplify the voices of parents and providers. And so that includes Norwalk Acts, the Connecticut Network for Children and Youth, Child Care for Connecticut's Future, Team Inc., and the Northeast Early Childhood Council. So we're really grateful for the partnership of all of these organizations in this really important work. So a little bit of background in case you're unaware of this change. Late last legislative session, the state legislature decided to change the eligibility date in which children could enter kindergarten. So up to this point, children could enter kindergarten as long as their birthday occurred by December 31st of that year. So a child could be 4 years and 8 months and register and start kindergarten in late August or September. Starting in July of 2024, a child will have to be 5 years old by September 1st in order for their parents to register them for kindergarten. And so that's this summer. So any child entering kindergarten next year has to be 5 years old by September 1st. Without proper implementation of this policy change, there is concern among parents, among early childhood educators, K through 12 educators and administrators that this policy change could really disproportionately impact families that are low income. And we're not anticipating that they would have to pay an additional year of preschool or child care. It's worth noting that this policy change does bring Connecticut in alignment with most other states in the country. And so there is, good reason that this policy change is coming into effect. It's also been a policy change that's been discussed at the state legislature for many, many years now. And so I do want to acknowledge the fact that the argument of this campaign is not whether or not this policy change should move forward, but instead, how can we really encourage the state legislature to be very thoughtful about the implementation of it, so that families that are low income are not disproportionately impacted by it, and that the early childhood care and education system has time to adjust to the fact that there's going to be thousands of additional children who everyone thought was going to move up to kindergarten and now will not be doing that. And so they'll be taking additional seats in the early care and education system, which we know already has a shortage. So I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Coralys Santana, who is a policy and advocacy strategist at the Connecticut Project Action Fund.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for that great introduction to the issue. Why we're involved, I think, is a really great question to address early on, because as Courtney alluded, we are not opposing the policy as it stands, right? We're just asking the legislature to be thoughtful about the impact to parents and early care providers and educators. So we agree that it makes sense to bring Connecticut in alignment, but a successful transition shouldn't leave families frozen out of early care learning experiences. When this passed, it received very few public hearing support or opposition. Like, it didn't receive a lot of attention. And so what we're asking the legislature is to consider the impact of working families and the under-resourced early care and education system. This requires adequate time and resources so that children can enter when they're ready without disproportionately impacting low-income families or the early care education system as a whole. Next slide, please. So the problem is that implementation in this rush timeline lacks equity. To benefit from starting kindergarten at age 5, low-income families need support to pay for an extra year of childcare or preschool, right? So if you've enrolled your child in pre-K3, expecting them to spend 2 years in preschool, then you would now have an extra year for that child in preschool or childcare. What we know is that approximately 9,000 families are going to be impacted by this next school year based on historic enrollment. And families already spend on average, right, $12,731, closer to $13,000 now, and inflation, and that's probably on the lower end. What we've analyzed is that an additional 4,500 subsidized seats based on the subsidy eligibility are required. I think these numbers need updating, but 42 towns lack preschool seats, and 122 towns are in need of infant toddler seats. And I mean, this is already things that you all know, right? But I think legislators need a reminder. Early childhood providers don't have enough time to adjust for 9,000 kids, 4,500 low-income families coming into the system when, you know, there are already hundreds of children on wait lists in various programs. So it also creates this bottleneck for the under-resourced early care connection, early education and care system. There's already a shortage. If the preschoolers are not moving into kindergarten, then that means that it's harder to transition the toddlers into preschool and so on and so forth. So that means parents, you know, that have just had babies are going to have an even harder time getting access to programs. I remember for me, I waited 2 years for my daughter to get into preschool in our town. Prior to that, I was driving her up with me to Hartford to a daycare there. So without proper funding and implementation, the change in kindergarten eligibility means that thousands of families can't afford preschool for another year, are going to be without a structured learning environment. Data from the Office of Early Childhood indicates that about 2,700 children don't go to any program. And so if children who are 4 years, 8 months are going to wait till they're 5 to enter kindergarten, that's a whole nother year of a child's life that they're not going to have access to any education because their parents already are not accessing early care or preschool. So what are we trying to accomplish with this campaign? We really want all children to have the chance to enter kindergarten ready to learn, grow, and succeed. So we are advocating for phasing in this change so parents and early childhood educators have time to plan, and increasing child care subsidies by $50 million a year to help the thousands of families who will need an extra year of child care that they didn't expect. Now, to be clear, we understand that the $50 million is not going to account for all of the needs of the early care system, but it does account for, based on the school readiness formula, what we've estimated is the population eligible for subsidized either school readiness or care for kids. And so that would allow this particular policy to have a more smooth transition. But you can't create those seats overnight, and we understand that. So that's the idea behind asking for a phase-in. The benefits of the campaign and the ask are that families, facing financial constraints can have access to affordable preschool and childcare, a stabilization of the childcare system. We don't want to overburden the progress that's already being made, right? And we know that there's a lot of work from folks on this call going on to ensure that we have a equitable early care system for all children. And we want all families to have equitable access to the system, to have high quality preschool education and enter kindergarten better prepared. So a couple of weeks ago, over 100 organizations, some of you who are on this call, advocates, parents, providers, educators, retired providers and educators, sent a letter to lawmakers. These are some of the folks who signed on. I won't read all the names, but hopefully you will either see your name there or see some familiar names, and are encouraged to also support the letter. Alongside information about the campaign is being mailed to legislators and the governor as well, but the press did get a hold of this letter. And so there has been a lot of communication around the concerns implementing this policy in such a rushed way. So these are some of the headlines. Connecticut kindergarten law change prompts pushback from parents and advocates. Childcare providers ask Connecticut leadership for $50 million in funding for new education law. September 1st, Connecticut kindergarten cutoff could mean 400 fewer Bridgeport students and millions less in funding. And how school districts are responding to Connecticut's new kindergarten cutoff, it wasn't well thought out. So these were, written by our media. We're happy to share those articles with you later after this call, and make sure you all get a chance to read them. But press spoke to providers like you about what you all are doing and what you're hearing from parents as to what you're going to do to accommodate. Parents, I don't think, are aware as they should be, and the closer we get to that September 1st date, the more parents are going to be left without options if this does not get addressed. So how can you help? You can take action with us in our action center. I will be dropping that in the chat just right now, and add your name to the petition. It's really important that folks hear from you, because when this decision was made, they didn't hear from you. And so there's an assumption that not hearing anything is good, and that this is just going to be, you know, business as usual. And that simply isn't true. You know that, I know that, and it's important that legislators know that too. You should share your story with us. It's better for folks who, you know, don't have this profession, don't truly understand all the work and the hours you put in to ensuring that your programs are successful, your families are well served. And so we are well positioned to elevate those stories and amplify them so that more folks are aware. It's really critical that folks have your perspective as experts in this field. And so if you're willing to share your story with us, please email us at actionfund@ccproject.org. You can also contact me directly. I speak Spanish, happy to help in any way I can. I will drop my contact information in the chat as well. And if you can share the Action Center with somebody you know, share it on your email list, because what'll happen is when session begins, we will be able to let you know when public hearings are happening, when information is changing, and you can stay up to date with all of the information that as we receive it, you can receive it as well. So what we envision parent and provider success to be is that solutions consider you first. A phase-in that allows you to adjust and serve the additional 9,000 families, more subsidized preschool and childcare slots that create financial relief, and a standard that before policies like this are passed, you are consulted, because I think there wasn't a whole picture, right, when this passed. And so it's really interesting to find ourselves here so close to implementation of this policy, advocating for equity when this should have been the standard from the beginning. So with that, we can do questions.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. So I'm going to start, I'll just start us off. And folks, if you have comments, please put those in the chat for each other. But if you have questions, please pop them into the Q&A. It's easier for me to see them there. So I'm going to start. I'm curious if we were able to convince them to switch this into a phase-in of this law, phase-in implementation of this law. Do you have any vision for how that would be phased in? Is it, you know, children with birthdays at a certain time? Is it geographic? You know, I'm just curious how you think that through.
Coralys, I'm happy to take this, and then if you want to jump in. That's a great question. And I think there's several different approaches that we can consider. In our materials, we have said it requires at least a year of a delay in order for the early care and education system to create new seats to accommodate the 9,000 children. We did that for simplicity in messaging. I think there's been some other interesting suggestions about delaying and then phasing it in over time so that the eligibility date could change to November 1st in 2025, for example, and then all the way to September 1st the following year in 2026, so that the impact is more gradual over time. again, allowing the early care and education system to create more seats to accommodate those additional children. I think, you know, we're open to all of these kinds of suggestions. And I think the point is to convey to legislators that the system needs more time to adjust.
Right.
Yeah,
Coralys,
it's not a flip of the switch when you sign the law in, like all of a sudden the early care sector can just accommodate for, you know, if the K-12 system needs time to adjust, so does the early care. You all know, you know, education begins very young, and it's critical for their success. And so that is why we're urging, you know, providers and folks in this space to voice their expertise, because there's not a understanding of how nuanced this can truly be.
So there's two questions here that kind of go together. So I'm going to read them both because I think that'll be useful. Joanna asks, when do you expect something to begin? And when is the earliest the legislature could make a change based on the dates of their legislative session? Pre-K registration starts at programs in my town for returning students in December, and for new students on January 2nd. The kindergarten registration process starts in late January. And then Barb says, a comment, this is time sensitive because some of us are making costly decisions now to accommodate these children. We're also doing enrollment now and making decisions based on space. And so this sort of goes to, this speaks to the timeline. We know the legislative session this year starts a little bit later because this is the second year of the session. I don't know, Meryl, do you know the start date? I had it, but I don't have it on the top of my head now.
February 7th.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thanks, Ava. That's what I was going to say too. All right, well, learn to trust myself a little more. But so February 7th. So a lot of enrollment is going to be finished. People, as Barb says, are making costly adjustments. So, you know, is it full steam ahead? You have to make those adjustments because we're going to have kids to accommodate no matter what. Do you expect anything could happen before the legislative session begins? Or is this like next session, we're just hoping? I'm just kind of curious how you're envisioning this.
Happy to take that on. I think in a perfect world, we would have had this debate before the law passed, right? We would have had your input beforehand and know like what you have to go through in order to make this successful. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And so we are up against the clock, and we know that we are encouraging folks to continue making the plans, right? Certainly we hope that we are successful, but as you said, session begins February 7th. We want to have folks talking about this now and as early as we can, have public hearings and have a bill raised. But the reality is that this is us trying to right a wrong after the fact. And unfortunately, you all weren't considered beforehand, and you know the legislature really has to account for that themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's folks on this call probably who have mixed feelings about the change. Some are probably totally for it.
Yeah.
Some probably think it's short-sighted. But either way, the implementation of the change is really tough. And you know, as Cindy says, she writes, I think this, and I think she means the effort to change it. Rather, your effort to delay it creates more confusion around an already confusing change. Is it possible to push something softer, like encouraging districts to be more lenient with their appeal process for those babies born in September or October? So I guess, you know, I could imagine you all sending out a letter to school districts saying, hey, if you're going to do a waiver process, we encourage you to do waivers for kids born, you know, before November 1st this year. And that way next year it makes it, you know, I don't know about what that would actually look like, but in the meantime, is there something that you could be doing kind of district by district, something softer, as Cindy says? Curious about how you feel about that.
Yeah, it is an interesting thought, I think, and I'm happy that you raised it, Cindy, because the reality is that it's confusing for parents, you know, trying to figure out what they're going to do next year, right? Like as a parent myself, I'm getting ready for my daughter to transition from pre-K to kindergarten. And so part of this campaign is to create awareness about the change and what you should, do to prepare, regardless of the success of the campaign in terms of like what we're asking. And the second part is the district by district and everybody kind of doing it a little bit differently lacks the equity that we're talking about, because assuming, a well-resourced area, is able to either receive more children or transition kids easier than an urban district or an under-resourced district. And so it warrants the necessary attention that we're bringing to elevate that same point that you're bringing up, because it, again, was not considered early on and should have been.
There's someone who commented earlier in the chat that she was confused about this change and just registered her daughter. So she will be starting kindergarten this week. So, there's parents around the state who are having to make some really complicated decisions right now even. And Rayanne, I'm glad you brought that to our attention. Elizabeth wonders if a legislative champion has been identified yet to push your effort.
Yes, not yet. So we are have talked to some legislators, but we are talking to the chair of the Education Committee, as some of you may know, in a short session for bills to get considered. It is up to the chairs of such committee. And so our first step is to talk to a state representative, Jeff Curry, who chairs the Education Committee. We are actually talking to him next week. And so we will be bringing up most of your questions, the letter, everybody who has, supported this effort thus far, and really urging consideration of your perspective in the matter of implementing this change.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few more questions and comments coming in here, but it occurs to me that one way that your effort could be useful to families and to providers is by having probably your legislative push, but also having kind of a separate thing that supports districts in figuring out how to implement this in a way that actually accommodates for the seats available in their own communities. I mean, if a community has tons of, I don't know who does, they have tons of extra seats for 3 and 4 year olds, and everyone in that community can afford to send their kid to preschool, and nobody's, upset about any of this, then maybe they should go for it, right? I mean, start, sure, but you have to know that. And so who knows that? And who is able to connect with parents of children of that age? Who is monitoring that? Who's doing that analysis? And so that is also a really important area. I don't know if you all are working on any of that kind of analysis to support communities in case this legislative effort or as a kind of side effort to make sure that this can be successful. We can't count on the legislature.
Yeah, it goes back to that point, Izzy, about the awareness. Like, folks can't prepare for something that they don't know about. And most folks, still, I'm, going through my friends list, and like my friends, we all have kind of kids around the same age, and they didn't know. They only know because I told them, right? They have thankfully they have a friend that can be up to date on these things. And so building that awareness and letting folks know what their options are is absolutely part of this campaign. Unfortunately, we require the input, right, of the education system, of the early care system, to be able to point them to the resources. And so we can only make available what's out there. Some of you got a memo a few weeks ago, which is great. More information is always needed. And so again, if folks are not hearing from you all, they don't perceive there to be an issue.
So I know I'm based in Middletown, and our Middletown School Readiness Early Childhood Council is thinking this through and trying to do this analysis on our own to figure out, do we want to make recommendations to the Board of Ed of how we think this should be implemented. Now, we don't necessarily have power in the Board of Ed to see how that will be implemented, but that group is a trusted resource to the Board of Ed in our town. And we hope that if we came up with strong recommendations, that it could influence them. And so I wonder, if there are ways that that you all could also be resourcing early childhood councils or other kinds of groups in towns to support the Board of Ed in those efforts. That may be worthwhile. We are imagining, that if you have a bubble, or I still don't have a good word for a reverse bubble, I don't know, a hourglass. If there's a grade that is vastly different than other grades typically are, then it really costs the district a lot over time, having to get another teacher for first grade, then for a second grade, then you have to fire him for second grade, move him to third grade. It's not an easy thing. And so the way that they think this through now is not just for early childhood, but really will affect school district budgets for years to come potentially. And so that's where I think these two groups working together is going to be really important, because the impacts on school budgets could potentially, I don't know, I'm not a school budget expert, but I imagine that it could be pretty large over time.
Yes. We're also hearing from Liz Brown in the chat. So the Association for Boards of Education is supporting this effort. And so she's encouraging you all to contact your local boards of ed with your recommendations, ideas, an understanding of the issues so that they can help support. It's why we have a steering committee for the campaign that are experts in dealing with implementing this every day. Northeast Early Childhood Council is a steering committee member, and they have brought up a lot of the same points, Izzy. It's fascinating that there are so many hurdles, and you're right. Both sectors should be working together to do this, and it's not I'm sure that everyone wants this to be successful for the children, right? They deserve to be in an environment where they can thrive, and you all are trying to create that sometimes, out of magic, really, and so the reason for the time and the resources, the financial resources, is for you to be able to do that kind of with a level head and not feel like there's this immense pressure to do it overnight.
Yeah, Maureen posted in the chat that districts near her are testing children early to decide if they will enter early. And you can imagine also that, let's say it's a regional high school, if the various communities are doing this differently. Some are testing kids, some are doing it by birthday, some are not granting, some are granting to everyone, that when these kids all come together, there also could be some age mismatch. There's ways this could happen that could have some difficult ramifications down the road for the kids and the districts. I'll just point out a technical difficulty comment in the chat for you guys to notice. I'm flagging for that.
Yes, I just responded. So thank you so much. We just onboarded our communications director. She is fantastic and is helping us with all of the tech tools. I would encourage folks, if you want to share, copy paste the link from your browser and share it on your Facebook while we get that button issue fixed.
We've got a few more questions here. Cindy is saying an awareness campaign would be really helpful. And I think that's true. It's really hard to figure out how to target those families that are exactly in the affected demographic. And so, today we're coming up with all of these ways that you guys can expand your campain.
I love it.
So hopefully these are helpful. But I think it's true. That would be really useful. It's hard to figure out who are the best trusted messengers to get to those folks. Who has that list? And how do you?
I truly think it's like the providers who are serving these families, are fantastic trusted messengers. So if you have families in your programs that are affected, I know, my daughter is at Easter Seals, and so they're keeping a list of all of their preschoolers who are affected by this change. And so if you have a list, encourage those families to contact us, to share their stories, and we will provide them with the resources that we have available. And the more resources we compile, we will share those with families. But if families are willing to share their story, it will have tremendous impact because their voice is critical.
Yeah, Cindy is sort of echoing you there, saying districts could actively reach out to families through their own preschool programs and childcare centers to provide them with appeal forms. Making the process easy and available in the first year will ease the transition, and area childcare centers. So that is one option. We've got a question here from Joanne. Is anyone tracking what the various districts plan to do? For example, Westport's superintendent made the news that they will give a waiver to anyone who asks for it. And we know that every district is planning to implement this in a different way. And curious if you all are keeping a database of that at all, or if you know if anyone is.
I know, go ahead, Courtney.
Sorry. I'm not aware if anyone is tracking that. I also don't know if districts actually have to submit these plans to the State Department of Education, or what mechanism there is to kind of check in on each district. But so it's a good question. We've been, compiling what we've seen in the press. I know there's been articles about the different approaches that different communities are taking. I think we have a lot of concerns about the fact that each district seems to be doing something slightly different. And as Coralys mentioned, how that impacts equity statewide when different districts are taking different approaches. And I want to circle back again to our proposal here is to give the system more time. So both the early childhood system as well as the K-12 system to take the time to think this through, to focus on the equity implications, and to make sure that parents are aware of what their local policies are. And also to identify the additional resources for the early care and education system, because at the end of the day, there are going to be at least 9,000 additional children in the early care and education system, and we need to make sure that they have access to high quality childcare and preschool seats. And so I think, there's a lot of anxiety around the waiver process for good reason. But even if we figure that piece out, we still need to make sure that there's more seats in the early care and education system so that children who are not eligible through the waiver process have a place to go to thrive and to get what they need to enter kindergarten ready to learn, grow, and succeed.
Right. Liz Brown comments that the train has left the station. And she's right. Districts are developing plans for implementation, ask superintendents to plan and what they are seeing as barriers. Waterbury is working with School Readiness Council, and I believe most districts are moving forward. And I think that's right. John says, if not already mentioned, connecting with school board members, especially chairs, and your district superintendent is important. Okay, there's a question here. Giselle wonders, my understanding is that there is no requirement for students to enter kindergarten in Connecticut at that age. Kindergarten is optional. Testing creates a standard that affects minorities. Can you please speak on this?
So the waiver process is really not something we're equipped to speak on, if I'm honest with you. We are happy to hear your concerns and make sure that folks understand those. But when there are experts on what the different waiver processes are going to be, I would encourage you to re-ask these questions, because part of the lax equity component of this implementation is that there is no assessment, right? That doesn't exist. And so
well, it's not universal, certainly.
Yeah, right. It's not universal. And so there's no universal assessment, and folks were expected to do something without a lot of guidance. And I'm sure that is incredibly frustrating for folks and confusing for parents.
Meryl, I don't know, you're our kind of legal expert here often on Connecticut laws. Do you know, I was trying to remember, they changed the upper age for when you have to get your kid into kindergarten a few years ago, I remember, from 7 to 6. But is there a requirement that you actually send your kid to kindergarten? And I think what this is saying is it's not anything to do with the upper limit. It's really the lower limit that is being changed. So not that you have to send your kid to kindergarten, but that you can't send them until. Can you help us understand?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. It used to be you didn't have to enroll your child till 7, but think that got changed. I can't remember for sure.
Yeah, I think it got changed to 6 a few years ago because 7 was fairly outrageous. But yeah, okay. Let's go back to some questions and comments here. We have a few more. Carla says, in my town, they're having a waiver and assessment for children to be able to go to kindergarten if they pass the assessment. The tool has not yet been created, and this speaks to Giselle's question, which is how will it be and who's really monitoring it to make sure that it will be an equitable assessment. She says, I have 33 children staying another year in preschool. That's 33 children that will be taking up spaces. I have a December baby myself, and I am in no way ready to pay for an extra year of preschool. And someone else says a push for more money for subsidized preschool should be a priority. It's too late to change this process, in my opinion. So another comment saying, maybe we're pushing for the wrong thing. Should we be instead pushing for the state rather to subsidize those slots to help parents like Carla who are in no way ready to pay for an extra year of preschool?
So Izzy, I just wanted to reiterate, I mean, that is the solution that we're proposing, that the state legislature identify $50 million to offset the 4,500 impacted children that are eligible for subsidized preschool. And so that's the exact solution that this campaign is advancing. The delay and the phase-in is because we know that 4,500 seats, or actually 9,000 seats in total across the system, are not going to be created overnight. We know that childcare centers and preschools are facing staffing shortages, that they have, in some cases, have available classrooms that they just haven't been able to open because they haven't been able to hire the educators to lead those classes. And so that is really why the more time and more resources need to go hand in hand.
Great. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Joanne, I'm just going to point to folks to the chat where Joanne has posted a State Department of Education memo on guidance to support superintendents. This came out October 23rd. She says it does not recommend a specific assessment tool, but it requires districts to publish a schedule of when the assessments will be held. So, so folks may want to read that over and see what the SDE is recommending as guidance when you then go and work with your local superintendents. Okay, let's see. Meryl, Ava, do you all have any questions for our guests this morning? Because we are wrapping this up.
Don't have questions, but I was while we were chatting here, I was looking up the statute, and it's Title 10-184 on school start ages and mandates. And it says, according to Connecticut state law, that if by 6 years old you do not have your child registered in a school program or a homeschool equivalency, then you get fined $25 per day as a parent.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Meryl, did you have anything?
No, I think it's incumbent on everybody to check in with their school district and figure out what the plan is in their community to know, do they have they figured out, what are they planning on giving waivers? Do they have a procedure for doing that? Checking basically with school district administration and maybe your Board of Ed president to figure out where they've come down on this. By and large, school district folks look at this from the perspective of this is solving a problem of kids who aren't ready for school starting kindergarten too early. And they may not understand the early care system. I mean, we've all known that public schools don't understand the early care system very well, but the notion that, well, I've got 33 kids in my program who aren't going to be giving up a seat to a younger child, and that's going to create real difficulties for other families with little kids trying to get preschool. My families who are going to have to pay for another year of preschool are going to be really challenged by that. How are you going to deal with this? Are you planning on, I've got kids who had 2 years of preschool who were born in, middle of September. Have you figured out how you're going to decide whether that child is ready for kindergarten or not and give them a waiver?
Right.
That's all, the kinds of things that school districts need to be grappling with and learning from us about the challenges that this creates for the early care world.
Yeah.
I do want to echo Coralys's comment earlier that she like I, who are both in the same boat. Most of my friends found out about this new regulation because of me. So just like Coralys and her friends. So I mention that because you are the trusted messenger. You are the voice here of information. I'm not putting that that pressure on you. I'm just, speaking truth to the reality. You're the child care provider. You have the ability to access this information, which is phenomenal. But it's important to have that conversation with the parent because they might not know. Rather do it now than have them scramble later. So definitely have that conversation. And if the parent feels emboldened to get involved, then you have the links that are on the chat.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I just want to, just to close, reiterate that the goal is to have all children benefit from starting kindergarten at 5, right? And with access to program, that will be a lot more beneficial than if more families are frozen out of the system. And that's what the legislature needs to consider.
Yeah, no, thank you. Georgia's wondering, how did you determine the $50 million price tag, the number that you're advocating for?
Yeah, I'm happy to walk through that. So Georgia, the State Department of Education put out an estimate that 9,000 children will be impacted by this change. And based on state income distribution, half of those 9,000 live in households that earn at or below 75% of state median income, which is the eligibility requirement for school readiness. We then took the $10,500 rate that school readiness will be increased to next year and multiplied that by 4,500. And so that comes out to about $47 million. We also know that a subset of those 4,500 children are also eligible for Care for Kids funding. And so the estimate is at least $50 million. And so that's like our back of the envelope rationale for why 50 million. And I do want to reiterate the point that Coralys made at the beginning of the presentation, that we acknowledge that is by no means the extent to which the early care and education system requires additional funding. This is a narrow dollar amount to help to offset the cost for families impacted by this specific policy change. We are not saying that that's all, that the early care and education system only needs $50 million in order to sustain itself. It requires far more than that. And so I want to be crystal clear that that estimate is related specifically for this policy change.
Got it. And that, I mean, by the estimate and that you just gave, it doesn't actually have anything in there for families who would not qualify for a subsidized slot. So if there are families who've been planning, X amount of dollars for X amount of years, and they don't have enough savings to go into future, it really leaves, understandably, because we can only calculate based on subsidy rates, right? But those families are really left out of the equation on this.
Yeah, the economic impact is much larger than 50 million. It's
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And all families should really be encouraged to share what that reality is with their lawmakers, because I don't think that there's a true understanding of a family budget, expecting that transition or maybe free up some funds for other costs, and that's not going to happen. And we know, with inflation and everything else, it's just increasingly harder to sustain oneself. We learned a few weeks ago, right from the Alice report, what a family needs to be able to survive. It's crazy, almost.
It's dramatically more than what the subsidies are. Yeah.
So much.
So just looking at the Care for Kids report from August, there were 7,700 preschoolers getting subsidized by Care for Kids. Now that would be distributed between 3 and 4-year-olds. Mm-hmm. So there's a subset there of families who are using Care for Kids to pay for preschool and either don't have access to school readiness or are in a a program that doesn't get school readiness.
Mhm.
I'm also seeing a question here about what are the impacts on transitional kindergarten, and I know that that is a term of art that has different definitions in different parts of the state, and some school districts offer it and others don't. So I think maybe a little bit more from Tennille about what her real question is there, so we can understand what it is. If either you want to add something more into the chat or raise your hand and we can let you ask that question live.
Yeah, and I think, Georgia, oh, wait, it just disappeared, but Georgia had an interesting thing just to keep in mind, which is if we're asking for this money for pre-K, how do we be sure that that doesn't, as our community has been asking for a lot of money to totally reimagine this system, asking for more on top of it, does that distract? How does that change what we're asking for it to fix the system, which is already broken? This is a 1 year, 2 year ask. And so there's you don't want to have these competing dollars take over for things, but also how do we ensure that the money doesn't go to school districts and actually ends up in the early care system? So these are all great questions. They're not necessarily answerable now, but they are really important factors to keep in mind as this all progresses.
Izzy, I did want to clarify that this is not just a 1 or 2 year ask. There are going to be 9,000 additional children in the early care and education system forever moving forward with this state change. And so, I see this as a first step to address families that are impacted by this policy change, and a first step at increasing the amount of subsidized slots that we have in the early care and education system moving forward. So I think we need to be really upfront with the fact that this is not going to solve everything. But our goal of increasing access to high quality, subsidized, affordable care for all families in Connecticut, that this is one step in moving toward that goal.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say any of this in a way that gives you guys a hard time about your effort. This is an awesome effort. And, I think it's really good for you to hear from folks here about what are the pitfalls, and I know that when we showed that, when you showed that list earlier of all of the partners in this, you have some incredible partners who are great thought partners and are going to help this effort really think through all of the nooks and crannies of how this could be, all the pitfalls, there are a lot of them. So Liz Brown says additional consideration impact on K reimbursement in the ECS formula with potentially fewer students. So, again, then every time you bring up one comment, you have 3 more. Oh, right. That makes you think about this, and this makes you think about that. Programs, Tennille says, programs have transitional kindergarten to offset children who cannot get into kindergarten. Will these programs be diminished due to the early enrollment? So Meryl, that's just a clarification.
Okay, so those are early care programs, not public school transition. That was what I was trying to figure out, was like what?
Yeah. Who's running them? It's hard for us to know the answer to that.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I think
go ahead.
I will say I know that some school districts are talking about transitional kindergarten, right, as a way to accommodate, for the waiver process. I mean, it's just another question that should have been considered really early.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I think that is all of our questions. So grateful to you folks for being here, helping us think this through, giving us this information about your effort. If you'd like to put your contact and your share link in the chat one more time for folks, I think that would be helpful. And we're appreciative of your time today.
Thank you so much for having us. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you. You as well. Thanks so much. Let's see. I think just as a reminder to everyone, before anybody leaves, we do have a couple more things this morning. First, I just want to say that next week we'll be off for Thanksgiving, just to give you guys a little more breathing space to get back into the swing of things. And then the week after, we will have a part 2 on kindergarten start age. I think that Meryl and Ava, can you go into a little bit more in depth about what we're expecting for that?
Yeah, so I'll just jump in. We invited SDE, we also invited OEC, and we also invited CEA. So there's 3 different groups with many acronyms here. CEA is the Educators Association, basically the labor union that represents a good majority of teachers around the state of Connecticut, and they are the organization that initiated this round of this legislation that passed. I say this round because as it was confirmed in the presentation that this actual legislation change has been desired by many for many years, but this version of that law that passed was sponsored and spearheaded by CEA. So they'll be on to explain why they took this new law on, why it was important to them and their teachers. Then we're gonna transition over to SDE to talk about the waivers and more of like the ramifications, what you should be expecting, and resources. And then we're gonna close the call with OEC. Hopefully they can talk about the relationship and the conversations that they've had with SDE on this kindergarten start age, to give you guys as much information as possible on what you could tell your parents and different resources that might be available to them.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Meryl?
And I just want folks to remember the history of this, that it had a hearing, but it didn't get out of the education committee. So we assumed that, like all the previous years, it had just died in committee, and it then got resurrected and added to another bill at the last minute. So that's why it was a surprise for everybody. And that really was the power of the lobbying of CEA that made that happen. The difference between the chair of the committee being someone who was very connected to public schools, Representative Curry, versus the previous chair, Representative Sanchez, who was very connected to early childhood. And so that's the difference here. So yeah, that's
Great, thank you. And then Meryl, I think you also had a few other things you wanted.
Federal update. As I think everybody has heard, we didn't shut the government down on Friday. But Congress passed a short-term continuing resolution this year with the added twist that it created 2 deadlines, one January 19th and one February 19th. The January 19th, the reason that they split it was the theory that they are going to use the regular appropriations process to pass the various spending bills for federal agencies. And they're going to do half of those by January 19th, and then the other half that are sort of seen as the more contentious ones by February 19th. Well, one of the first agencies that has its budget up for consideration is the Department of Agriculture. So that includes SNAP and it includes WIC. The majority in the House pressed for that change because they have disliked being under pressure at the end of a budget year or a continuing resolution to pass a giant bill that includes everything. So they want to use the regular appropriations process where they feel they can have more power to enforce cuts. And there is a proposal to cut the WIC program by $185 million. That would reduce the WIC caseload by about 600,000 women and children. So roughly 40% of babies born in the United States are served by WIC, 2 out of 5. This could have a big impact on that. And then there are more cuts proposed for SNAP. So this is going to be a big fight. There isn't really a handle. I mean, yes, our Connecticut legislators should hear from you to know that this is important. but I think they all know it's important, and they're all going to be fighting on the right side of it. But it never hurts for us to weigh in with our members of Congress about the importance of these programs to the families that we all work with. So, okay, that's my great news from Washington.
All right. I mean, great news. We're not shut down.
Great. Yeah. Well, great, kind of sarcastically there. Yeah.
All right. Ava, do you have anything else before we finish up?
On the federal end, I've been getting notifications about the possibility of adding more funds for early care and education, but I will discuss this with Meryl and prepare a more clear presentation of what's happening, because I'm just getting news alerts from lobbyists on the federal side. So hopefully in a week or so, next call or the one after that, if there's like 5 minutes, then we'll have more information.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a degree of the best defense is a good offense, and pushing for $16 billion in a supplemental fund for early childhood is a way that we make sure that there aren't cuts. Yes, it would be great to get $16 billion of additional money for early care. But when everything else is getting chopped, I'm not going to stand on one leg waiting for that money to show up. But pushing for it and using every opportunity to talk about the issues that early care faces right now. Sort of the preview on that survey that we've been doing is that child care centers look to be short about 4,000 staff. So things have gotten a little worse rather than better, despite the fact that enrollment is up a little bit, but programs are all stressed still because of staffing issues.
Hey everyone, before we close out, don't forget that the links are in the chat, and I'm just pointing it out because Liz Brown from the Connecticut Board of Education, she's a chair. She put her contact information for folks to have.
So she's chair of CABE, which is the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, not the State Board of Ed.
Thank you.
Yes. Also for folks, just a reminder that we will, in the next 24 hours, post the recording to this, all the links. Oh, you know what? The links we post here's how we're doing it now. It's a new system. My apologies. There's a YouTube channel right on the website. So earlycareconnection.org. From there, you can click through to the YouTube channel. You can also go there directly. And as a suggestion, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel so that when the recordings become available, you get a notification, and that way you don't have to be checking back. And so the YouTube channel is Early Care Connection. It's really easy. I don't know, Ava, if you're able to share that in the chat right now for folks. But we post the videos. It takes a little while for Zoom to process them, and then we post them. And the way that we're doing it now is we're taking the chat file, if relevant, the Q&A file, and then any additional materials. So in this case, Coralys is going to send us this presentation in both Spanish and in English. We will post that as well. So all of that will be in the description of the video. If you go to the video, you can watch it, you can share it, you can save it. And then underneath the video is where we will post the links to all of those things. So it's slightly different than when we were sharing the Zoom recordings directly, because it shows up kind of more like what you're seeing now. But paying for Zoom storage is pretty expensive. And so we switched to YouTube as a more sustainable model over time. So this document, Carla, will be, this document in Spanish. That's a good question. I don't know if that does exist. Does anyone know if the government document, that's something we could ask for, but yeah, we can figure that out. We can also, these will all be listed in that chat file in YouTube. So, okay. I have immense gratitude for this community, and I'm very thankful for you all. And I wish you all a restful, wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope that you are able to take some time for yourself and your family and your extended family. We are an extended family of sorts, and it's really wonderful to be with you this week. And I just wish everybody the best, most wonderful week of, I don't know, gratitude. So we'll see you not the following Monday, but the one after that. And thank you again to our guests and to Sandra. All right. Thanks, everyone.